all of this sets the stage for some very bad stuff if Donald Trump loses. Now, Donald Trump may not lose. Maybe Donald Trump wins. Maybe Donald Trump pulls a last rabbit out of that giant hat, and suddenly he does a great debate, he comes back, and he wins. But let's assume for a second that Donald Trump loses. Over the last couple days, we talked yesterday about Sean Hannity going after Megyn Kelly, and Megyn Kelly saying that Sean Hannity was flacking for Trump, which clearly is true. And today, Megyn Kelly and Sean Hannity sort of made up. They tweeted out a picture of themselves together saying, "We're Irish, it's complicated, #friends." Good. Okay, look, good. For whatever it's worth, I'm glad that that's happening. I think that it is better that we all get along, because after this election cycle, we're all going to have to get along. Chuck Todd asks some questions. He says, if Trump has another bad debate, the GOP could publicly split. There could be a bunch of people who sort of walk away from Donald Trump if he has another bad debate.
What do they feel like will change the dynamic of the race, especially if you're Donald Trump?
Well, I think if you're Donald Trump, just any normalized debate is going to at least stop Clinton's momentum a little bit. But I think listen to the subtle signals that congressional Republicans were sending yesterday. A few blind quotes here or there. You heard, if Donald Trump doesn't have a good night on Sunday, and it's more, if it's similar to the first debate, then you may start seeing the down ballot exodus in some form. Is it just candidates proactively running away? Whatever it is, but you now have the sense that Trump's and we've been here before with him, but one of these do or die moments with the Republican Party, with the McConnell, where if it's a debate performance like the first night, it may be unrecoverable, and you may see the party publicly split.
Okay, well, I don't know if the party's going to publicly split. I think they'll hold it together through the election. But it does raise the question, what happens if Trump loses after all of this is over? Now, this election has basically come down to, for people on the right, this has come down to, and I discussed this at length yesterday on the podcast, but this has come down to, I think, in the end, a basic question. Do you think this is the last election, or do you not think this is the last election? Do you think that there's a possibility that Republicans come back and win in 4 years with someone who's better than Donald Trump, or do you sacrifice that possibility in favor of Trump is the best we can do, and we better get it now because otherwise we're totally screwed? Hillary's president, and she ruins everything, and there's no way Republicans ever get elected again. Ann Coulter sort of articulates this perspective last night. She says this election is the end of Western civilization if it goes the wrong way.
I'm not really interested in day-to-day politics, but this is, as you say, bigger than I've mostly written, the truth about Joe McCarthy, the truth about Darwinism, that sort of thing, not particularly involved in elections, but this will determine the survival of Western civilization, and it is because of cultures and demographics. Well, those are people bringing particular cultures with them. It's taken centuries to create the freest, most prosperous, fairest societies in the world, and there have been lots of studies about this, as you probably know, out of especially Samuel Huntington, some professors at Harvard, at UCLA. You never hear about this, so that the left can go on persuading Americans, and I suppose Canadians and British and so on, that American culture is the worst culture in the world, and the sooner we replace ourselves, the better off we are. We are somehow oppressing, these throngs of the third world that are now being brought in to replace us.
Okay, so I have sympathy for the argument that multiculturalism, not sympathy, I agree with the argument that multiculturalism is a blight on Western civilization, because if you have cultures that are post-Western civilization, that's not a good thing, that's a bad thing. However, the idea that Hillary Clinton's election is going to end it all, that's really that's really the break point. And I understand both sides. I understand people who say that it's going to end it all, but I've heard that every 4 years my entire life. In 4 years, we'll hear it again. And I think a lot of the people who say that Western civilization is over, you might as well pack up shop and go home, America's done, it's not America anymore. We have a lot of people I respect believe this. None of them will be quitting their commentariat jobs on November 9th if Donald Trump loses. Right, they'll all stick around. So even they don't believe this deep down in their heart. They believe that there's still a fighting chance and they have a chance to make a difference. If they didn't believe that, I assume they would quit and go off to the mountain somewhere and prepare for the bunker mentality. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think everyone really knows that November 9th, yes, things could be worse. Things could always be worse. Hillary Clinton could be an awful, awful president. But that does not absolve us of our duty to fight back, and it does not mean that we don't have a chance of winning if we do fight back. And that is what I'm hoping for November 9th. If things go downhill, if things go downhill, there's only one thing that's going to guarantee the dominance of the left 4 years from now. Because let's face it, if Hillary Clinton's elected, she's going to be unpopular. Nobody likes her now. She stinks. She's awful at everything she touches. She's unpopular. She's unlikable. She's annoying. She's corrupt. She's greedy. She's selfish. She's nasty. All these things are true. The idea that she's going to be some sort of world-beating president with a Republican Congress, I just don't buy it. I don't see it. What I see is a woman who's going to be very deeply unpopular from the first day she steps into office, will remain unpopular, or likely, just thanks to the vicissitudes of the economy, to undergo some sort of brutal recession in the near future, because the cycle is usually, every 10 years, there's a recession. There was one in 2000, there was one in 2008, there was one in 1991. Every 8 to 10 years, there's a recession. We're due. So that means that if it hits during Hillary Clinton's cycle, while she's president, then that hurts her too. So, I think that there's a lot to be optimistic about, even if Hillary Clinton is elected president. But that's going to require us to do one thing. And what that's going to require us to do is unify and stop blaming each other. So I can already see everybody is getting set to blame each other after this election cycle. And listen, I've been a part of it, and I apologize for having been a part of it. I think that everybody's been a part of the kind of blame each other for the Trump phenomenon, blaming people for voting stupidly in the primaries. Look, I think people voted wrong in the primaries. I'm not going to lie about that. But I understand why people voted for Trump in the primaries. They were angry. Trump was the avatar of that anger. Trump was the only person on stage who seemed to be reflecting that anger back at them. He was the only one who seemed to be fighting the kind of political incorrectness that people see in the culture. He seemed like the only one who was willing to say things that he ticked off the right people. Like, I get the rationales. I don't agree with them. I think they're wrong. I understand the rationales. If we're going to move together forward after this election cycle, the people who didn't vote for Trump, and the people who voted for Trump, and the people who reluctantly voted for Trump, we're all going to have to stand together to oppose Hillary Clinton and hopefully come up with somebody who's better next time. That first requires us to acknowledge that this is Donald Trump's fault. We need someone better next time. We can't have another Donald Trump. This is on Trump. If Trump loses to Hillary Clinton, a deeply flawed candidate, the most deeply flawed candidate of my lifetime, if Donald Trump loses to Hillary Clinton, that's not on me. That's not on Sean Hannity. That's not on the people it's not even on Laura Ingraham, who I think, really pushed him in an unfair way. It's not on any of those people. In the end, it's only on one person, and that is Donald Trump, because it's the candidate's job to garner support. His job is to earn my vote. If he didn't earn my vote, he didn't do his job. My job is not to vote for him. My job is to be conservative and vote for the candidate who I feel not only best reflects the principles, but the person who's best capable of forwarding those principles. So when we talk about Republican unity, everybody's going to have to look inside their own house. Everybody's going to have to look back at themselves and think, what did we do to bring ourselves to this sort of impasse? I think a lot of the Trump voters are going to have to look and say, did we make the most intelligent decision to channel our anger, our understandable anger at the status quo, a feeling that Congress doesn't do anything, that the Republicans sell out? Did we do the best thing by pushing somebody who is a career Democrat, who doesn't know anything about policy and just says absurd things because he's famous? Was that the wisest decision? Conservatives are going to have to stop acting as though every single battle is the end of the republic, because it's that mentality that leads to the idea you got to back the guy, the only one who can win, the one who's going to punch the hardest. You got to back the guy who's going to forestall the apocalypse, even if he is the second worst thing to the apocalypse. Not everything is the apocalypse. Things are bad. Things are really bad. I'm not BSing you. That doesn't mean that every single moment is the moment when America is over. It isn't. Okay, America's getting worse. We're on the wrong path, and yes, we're headed toward a cliff, and that cliff is coming, but we're not quite over the cliff yet. If we were over the cliff, there'd be no reason for me to do the podcast or for you to listen. Okay, that's what conservatives have to do. We need to recognize that, yes, our principles are right, but we don't have to suggest that every single hill is the hill where the republic dies. We have to be willing to die on every hill, but we can't give up ground to the left. But we have to stop with the crisis mentality that suggests that every single battle is the end of the republic, and so if we lose, we're all going to die, and let's just get the guy who can win, even if he doesn't represent us. Meanwhile, the establishment, which I think is largely responsible for the rise of Trump, by not listening to its own base, by scorning its own base, by pretending everything was hunky-dory, by caving to Democrats, by making deals, they're going to have to start listening to the outrage of the American public, and they're going to have to start recognizing that go along to get along because things are basically okay isn't accurate for the vast majority of Americans. We don't think things are okay, and conservatives don't think that, and Trump voters don't think that. Nobody thinks that. So that's all stuff that we have to do. All of us. We all have to look into our own houses and clean up our own houses. But we also have to have sympathy for people who are trying to clean up their house, and we all have to acknowledge that we're trying to move in the right direction. We're going to need some unity after this election is over, no matter which way it goes. But that's particularly true if Trump loses. We're going to have a unified movement so we can come back in 4 years. And we also have to recognize something. If we just put it on the candidate, we're going to be better off. John McCain lost in 2008 because he wasn't a good candidate. In 2010, Republicans united, and they elected a Republican Congress. Now, the Republican Congress didn't do enough to do what we wanted them to do, but that was a victory. In 2014, won a sweeping victory after recognizing Mitt Romney was not the right guy. Mitt Romney did not do a good job as a candidate. We can either sit around smacking each other and continue to waste our efforts in the House and the Senate in 2018 if Trump loses, or we can recognize that we're still in the fight of our lives here and that Donald Trump was not the right guy to lead us forward. And the truth is, it's hard to find the right guy to lead us forward. It's hard to find a leader because human beings are inherently flawed, all of them, including Ronald Reagan. Everybody is flawed. We tend to overlook their flaws if they win. But that it's harder to find the presidential candidate than it is to win Congress, or to unify around a Republican basic ideology ticket. That's what we ought to be doing. We ought to be unifying around the ideology, recognize our own flaws, try to fix those for the future, get rid of the crisis mentality for conservatives, or at least minimize it a little bit. Recognize that there is a crisis if you're somebody in the establishment, and if you're a Trump supporter, if you're somebody who voted Trump to burn it all down, recognize that burn it all down is not a responsible response to the system. The proper response to the system is to destroy the parts of it that are bad and maintain the parts of it that are good. The guy who just pledges to go in there and break everything up with a hammer is probably the least likely guy to actually do it. And by the way, if he does destroy everything with a hammer, then you're left with nothing.